Other types of cables. Now, this is basically the continuity from the previous lesson. All right, so if you open 18b other types of cables _ start.blend, you'll be presented with this scene. Now, if you notice the little hoops in the previous lesson where I accidentally unlock this scale of this bone, instead of locking it, it's rectified in this scene for you. The only difference is that I sparse the actual model that we're going to talk about in this lesson. Before diving further with the other types of cable, I'd like to take a moment and talk about the special kind of relationship that the object has with the armature. And I'm talking about parent-child relationship here. So when you're using automatic wait, you're using the shortcut key Control P, which is basically parenting. So what you're doing is you're using the automatic wait as a parent-child relationship to actually set an armature, as well as set a parent-child relationship between the object and the armature. Now, the actual movement of it is made by the armature modifier and not by the parent-child relationship. So if I come here and delete this, for example, and I grab this bone, it won't pose. However, because this is a child of the armature, if I am in object mode with the armature and move it around, it will actually move the object around. And this is so if we're linking this object into another scene with the rig and we move the rig around before starting to animate, it will follow it. All right. Now you will notice that there's a parent type drop down, and by default it's set to object. So when you're parenting directly to bone, for example, it's using the bone type. So, and then you need to specify the bone. So when you select an object and then shift select the bone and control Control P directly to the bone, it's actually doing this type. Now you also have the armature type, which is actually working much like the modifier in the sense that it actually looks at the vertex groups in order to make it deform. However, if you have both of those on, you will get a double deformation. Now, this special type of parent-child relationship of parent type to the armature is something that was used mainly in the Blender game engine in the previous version of Blender in 2.79 and earlier. Now, the Blender game engine no longer exists, and this was a must in order to make the armature work in Blender game engine. Now, in here, it's not a must, so having it to object and should have it on object or on bone in this case. So if you export this, it will recognize it's an object. It will make sure the armature modifier gets carried over with it. Now, the armature modifier has advantages over the other parent type, which is the armature here. For example, this type will not actually preserve volume like this one does. So, and also it won't directly use bone envelope, it will just use vertex group. The armature modifier also has the advantage to be able to edit in pose mode by having these on. So you'd be able to go in and edit while it's still posed, even when you're actually performing some weight painting or assigning weight. This is really a big bonus that you do not have with the other way, right? Just to be wary of that. Now, however, when you're using automatic weight, it will automatically do like this or directly to the bone. Just to be wary of that. Now, if you'd like to be able to actually hide and unhide from the view directly in the outliner, you have to expand the armature in order to go do that here. All right. Now, you could go ahead and unparent that directly from it, but the problem with that is that you'll most likely forget to go and parent it back before actually releasing this to your animator, and then they'll try to bring that into another scene through link, and they won't be able to make it work because the parent-child relationship isn't there. So very important to understand that when you're parenting your object, your armature, it will actually go underneath the armature here. All right, so we're going to hide this one, and then we're going to focus on the high resolution cable. So we're also going to hide the Bezier curve cable, and we're just going to keep that one. And I'm going to press Alt-G to clear the location of that one. All right, so this is a much higher polygon model. All right, so it's definitely not for game. So it's something that would remain in Blender. Now, if you would use regular bone, you would need many bone to make this actually deform properly and use a lot of tedious weight painting. However, we're not going to do that. We're going to use the power of Blender. But before we do that, I want you to remember of what we did in the previous lesson. We basically created directly the armature like this, and then we automatically assign weight with this, and these 5 bones that are the control bones for the NURBS path, they were not there yet. So they were not considered in the automatic weight, but now that they're there, they will be considered if they're not set to, or if the deform here that allows the envelope distance and weight of each of the bones, as well as the tail versus the head, all right, if this is on, it will take in consideration that bone, and we don't want that. So I will select each of these bones and make sure the deform is not on, so we can actually use automatic weight and save time, because that's the entire point of using automatic weight. All right, so now that I have done that, I can safely select this mesh, shift select this bone, and then again do Control P, and just for fun, let's use envelope weight, and now we have the envelope. And see, the trouble with the envelopes is it's not quite following the actual NURBS path. So let's undo that until we see the cable pop back here. And then let's actually use automatic weight. Control P, automatic weight. Now with automatic weight, you notice that it actually follows perfectly the actual NURBS path. However, it bends terribly, all right? And this is a dense mesh, so we could go try to tediously go and weight paint this, but there's really no point because Blender has a secret power tool, all right? So let's actually put these bones on and make sure they are set to B bone. And then let's go to the bone and let's actually add bendy bones segments. All right, so we're going to put 6 segments on each of these bendy bones right there. Well, let's do the same right here. 6, 6, and 6. And that should do the trick for the half. So what I want to show you is the difference. All right, so if we go here, and I'm just going to unselect the mesh here. So if I grab that side, which has no bendy bones, you can see the original deformation that is provided by the automatic weight. And on this side, now I have some nice bendy bone that takes care of making sure it looks smooth. Right? So I get away really without weighing when it comes to high res because of the bendy bones. So very nice feature to have and to take advantage of. So I'm just going to quickly go and make sure that all the other ones are set to 6 segment so we can have a proper cable for a high res. Now this would not export to a game engine, and you wouldn't want to export a high res cable like that to a game engine. You would use all the resources for nothing. So basically this is for Blender scenes and it works really well for just Blender. And now we do have a nice cable with the high res version. So now that this one is actually rigged and working and all smooth and all nice, let's actually take a look at the next cable. So if we expand the armature, let's actually hide this cable as well. And then let's unhide the multi cable, which is the very complex one. So we're going to select it and press Alt G to snap it back to the center there. Now we could do like we did with the other cable since it's high res, and we could just shift click debone and press Control P and use automatic weight. But then what happened is this is a multi-object. Even though it's one object, it's still comprised of a few different pieces inside. So it doesn't really know how to take the weight and distribute it properly. All right, so we're going to undo that a few times until it pops back here. So the workaround for something like this is to actually make a cage and use that cage to deform this mesh. So I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to add a cube. I'm going to enter edit mode. I'm going to scale the cube down and I'm going to scale the cube in X until it goes over all that. And I will actually make it see-through. So if you go to the Object tab under Viewport Display and under Display As, we can set it as wire. And then we know that we have 12 segments. Right? So I'm going to press Control R and add 12 segments. So because we have 12 bone in our chain, we want 12 segments here. So we have 12 segments. So I'm going to just check the side view if it englobes everything. And it does, so that should do the trick. And I'm going to tab out of there, and I'm going to bind that to the armature. So I'm going to press Ctrl P and use automatic weight. Now on this one, all right, when I bend it, it looks great. However, it looks better if you come here and put preserve volume on. Now you do not see much of a difference actually. It's when you go squish it more that it actually will make a difference. All right. So now all we need to do is to select the object that is complicated and go to the modifier panel and select mesh deform. All right, so we're going to sample the object's cube. We're going to up the precision of 1 or 2, and then we're going to hit bind. So it takes a moment, and then once you see the button and this grays out, it means that it's bind to the actual cube. All right. So now if I grab this, we have a cable that is complicated that will follow precisely the actual armature. Now, what you'd have to do at this point is to actually make a parent-child relationship of this to the actual armature. So you'd go here and make it a child of the armature. So that way, if it gets linked into a different scene, it will follow. All right, so very important. And that is how you do that for a high-res cable. You notice that the rig is exactly the same. It's the way we actually bind it that differs a little bit. All right, so now that brings me to the last one. So we're going to hide that multi-cable. All right, and let's put the Bezier curve cable on. Now, if you remember in the previous lesson on the NURBS pad, we used hooks to actually make that work with the bones. Now you can do the exact same thing on Bezier curves. However, you have to make sure to not select just the points, but select the entire handle when you do so. And I'll demonstrate that using the shortcut key. So if I grab these, just like that, and press Ctrl H for hook. So if you go to segments or control point, you have hooks, control, and you can set it to new object, to selected object, or to bone. So in this case, I'm just going to put a new object. Just want to show a point here, and I'm going to tab out of there. I'm going to select the hook, and I'm going to bring it up. You see what this does, and this is why I prefer using a NURBS curve to actually make a IK or a spline IK than using a Bezier curve. All right. Now, in order to rectify this, you would have to instead, so if I undo this a few times until we don't have the hook, you'd have to select the handles as well. Right? And then press Ctrl H and hook to new object. Now it would take all these hooks. All right, so you could tediously go and bind each of these to each of the bones, or you could simply do like what we just did. And so Alt G, put that inside the cube there, and simply select the NURBS, go to modifier, add a mesh deform, and then choose the cube, and then up the precision a little bit, hit bind, wait a moment, and boom, we've got NURBS cables that are being deformed by a cage that is made of poly. And again, you would have to go and make a parent-child relationship with the armature. So if you would link this to another scene, it would actually follow. And you also need to do that with the NURBS pad, so make sure to set that to the armature. So that way, if you link the armature or the collection with the armature to a different scene and proxy the rig and move the entire thing in object mode, everything will follow instead of having it some parts left behind and avoid it working. So this pretty much concludes the cables.